Hey YouTubers, this is the GSTV viewer coming at you with my GSTV Obscurities installment for you guys today. As you can read up at the title screen, this is going to be my review on perhaps a pretty forgotten teen drama that aired on NBC in the early 2000s. And it's a show that I don't really hear anyone talking about in this day and age. I don't even know if anyone really even knows that the show exists to begin with. But this particular show that aired on NBC centers around a group of three middle class teenagers adjusting to adolescent life in the fictional town of Beechwood, Washington. And the show that you can read up at the title of the screen is a coming of age drama which is called Just Deal. Now, this is a show that, to be honest, I did not know about growing up, but it aired on a Saturday morning lineup called TNBC. And for those that don't know, TNBC was a Saturday morning lineup that was catered towards the teenage young adult crowd. And this was at a time when Saved by the Bell's popularity was at an all time high. Because Saved by the Bell had been a very successful TV show that aired on Saturday mornings in the late 80s going in the early 90s. And by this point, NBC's Saturday morning, as far as their cartoon lineup was concerned, they weren't really doing very well as far as ratings are concerned. After the cancellation of the Smurfs, NBC didn't really have that next big thing as far as their cartoons were concerned. So throughout the 90s, we all talk about Fox Kids, we talk about Kids WB and how much of a dominance, how much impact that it had for their Saturday morning lineup. You still had ABC, and CBS was still around, although it would also meet its gradual decline by the end of the 90s as well. But when we think of 90s Saturday morning kids blocks, we all think of Fox Kids, Kids WB, ABC, especially with their one Saturday morning lineup once Disney purchased ABC and basically overhauled their Saturday morning lineup. NBC, on the other hand, they really started to take note of their gradual declining of their programs. And so we get to 1992, and Saved by the Bell was pretty much their go to show at the time. So it was in 1992 that NBC decided to overhaul their Saturday morning lineup by phasing out their cartoons in favor of live action shows catered towards the teenage young adult audience. And one of those shows that aired on the Saturday morning lineup to kick off the TNBC era was California Dreams. And from that point on, it was pretty clear that NBC wanted to cash in on the success of what made Saved by the Bell successful, which shows, like I mentioned, with California Dreams and then City Guys, and then also Hang Time later on as well. You might as well count NBA Inside Stuff, considering this was at a time when NBC had NBA coverage. TNBC was a block that ran for about 10 years from 1992 to 2002. And TNBC had been really known to produce a crop of sitcoms produced by Peter Engel and his company, who helped produce Saved by the Bell. And much like what ABC was with TGIF as far as Miller Boyd is concerned with their crop of sitcoms like Full House, Family Matters, Step by Step, Hanging with Mr. Cooper. So it's kind of similar as far as that analogy as far as TNBC and TGIF, because now there are some contrasts with TNBC being the unofficial comedy block, that both those blocks are catered towards a young audience that contain a very sort of a squeaky clean comedy lineup. The shows are very cheap to produce. A lot of it's very formulaic, recycling a lot of plot lines from Saved by the Bell, with, like, for instance, with California Dreams, where Tiffany ended up taking steroids, and in a very similar way to Jesse had to go through in Saved by the Bell, and basically doing like a lot of rehashing of key important plot lines from Saved by the Bell. But TNBC was known for cashing in on the success of their already established franchise. And thus, speaking of that, Saved by the Bell also had the new class, which would air from 1993 to 2000. TNBC was known for their situated comedies that really helped define the block. And then by the time you get to the turn of the century, there was actually a new show that would stray as far from that particular element. And this particular show is actually a show that did not include a laugh track. Just Deal aired from September 23rd of 2000 to September 7th of 2002. Now, this show, as far as the premise is concerned, is we get these three main characters. We get the inclusion of Ashley Gordon, who is introduced as the new kid in town, having moved in with her mother in the wake of her father's death from a heart attack. She meets up with a teenager named Dylan Roberts, who, along with his companion Jermaine Green, would go on to become fast friends. Dylan is a proactive kid who decides to give up his extracurricular activities while devoting his time improving on his academics. Jermaine adjusts to life as a single child after the wake of his parents filing for divorce. And with everyday problems comes an obstacle that they have to deal with, hence the name of the show. Now, unlike most dramas that tend to air on primetime, Just Deal was one of the, if not the rarest case that a teen drama would air during the morning hours. Just Deal ran for 2 years, 3 seasons, and with a total of 39 half-hour episodes. It's unclear regarding the show's untimely cancellation, although low ratings combined with NBC's decision to retire the TNBC banner may have likely been the factor. Reruns continued to air on The N, which is now known as Teen Nick, from January 2003 to December 2004. Since then, this show, along with the majority of the TNBC lineup, has since vanished from the airwaves. To this day, the show has yet to be released on DVD, let alone being made available for online streaming services. So in recent years, I've spent some of my free time binge watching some of my favorite television shows from my childhood, some of which you could find on your TV set to this day, or online video streaming such as, but not limited towards, Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, and so forth. However, there are also other TV shows I haven't watched in many years that hardly anyone talks about these days. Whether they disappeared from the airwaves or the fact that these shows aren't released domestically on a DVD or Blu-ray and such, these factors were what inspired me to create this video installment. Growing up, the only shows I watched from the TNBC lineup, aside from Saved by the Bell, were California Dreams and City Guys. It wasn't until I discovered them through reruns and syndication. Just when I reminisced the latter two shows, I came across a particular show from a VHS rip online after I finished watching a random episode of City Guys. An announcer advertised all the shows that were featured on the TNBC lineup at the time, including the series premiere of Just Deal. I was pretty intrigued and curious to see what the show was all about. When I looked it up, I was fascinated to see there were episodes of it online, even for a program that has since been a lost gem in time. The instant I viewed the pilot episode, the show's overall presentation was such a far cry from the usual lineup. I was hooked from the word go. The more episodes I watched, it led me to think one question. Would this show have gotten more recognition had it aired on primetime? What if it had been a 1-hour program like most contemporary dramas? I'm surprised there's hardly anyone that ever talks about this show. No character shipping videos, episode clips, hardly anything. And why is that? The more episodes I watched, the more I was really fascinated by the show's overall presentation. The show was not produced in a multi-camera sitcom in the veins where the show shot in a live studio audience, and it doesn't even have to include a laugh track. And that's kind of one of the many things I really liked about the show that really stood out from a lot of the shows that were featured on the TNBC block. The episode opens up with a pilot, which is called Incoming. And the show opens up with one of our main characters, that being Dylan, who awakens from bed with his mother acting as a clock alarm. We meet up with his older brother Mike Jr., a star football quarterback, along with his best friend Jermaine, as they both head their way to Beechwood High School. With the first day of the school year, Dylan challenges Jermaine to a race, but Jermaine refuses as Dylan manages to make it to school first. Meanwhile, Ashley rides in with her mother to Beechwood, having moved from San Francisco following her untimely tragedy of her father's death. As she arrives, Ashley attempts to meet up with the school's counselor, Mr. Pena, when Dylan spills coffee on her by accident. Dylan apologizes, but his overconfident attitude rubs Ashley the wrong way. So as the episode progresses, Dylan hangs out at this local mall at a sporting goods store when encountering her once again. While both of them are playing basketball, they accidentally destroy their equipment when mall security restrains them from fleeing the store. Dylan's parents, along with Ashley's mother, cross paths for the first time. They are relieved when Ashley's mother, particularly, agrees to pay the fine as a result of the damages caused in the sporting goods. Back at school, Dylan and Jermaine try out for the soccer team while Ashley's by the sidelines sketching a picture of her late father. She confronts with Naomi, the cheerleader captain of Beechwood High, as she scolds Ashley until Dylan comes in to defend her. After nearly flunking last year, Dylan continues to express difficulty coping with his academics. He has an exam coming up and lacks the confidence he needs to perform well. With her upbeat attitude, Ashley provides a pep talk with a saying that they all have something to deal with, so just deal. Dylan agrees to have her help him study before going on to nail the exam. Despite a job well done, this also came with the price. Mr. Pena encourages him to put aside his extracurricular activities while continuing to improve on his study habits. As the soccer coach prepares to appoint a team captain, Dylan at the last moment decides to opt out while passing down such an opportunity to his friend Jermaine. The episode concludes with our three main characters leaving the football field with joy and optimism. And yeah, I really thought this was an excellent way to introduce the viewers to the show. We get to learn more of the basics behind the purpose of the main characters and the ups and downs that had to go through during their first day. Each of them have an individual obstacle that they need to overcome, such as, for instance, Dylan's ongoing academic struggle, Ashley coping with her father's death, and to a lesser extent, Jermaine's life adapting to his parents' divorce. It's a simple, straightforward, and very easy to watch from beginning to end. Compared to other TNBC shows before this, Just Deal really goes out their way to emphasize more on the backstory behind the trio without necessarily being too hokey or preachy. Overall, Incoming proves that with a cohesive plot, it leaves the viewers captivated to tune in to the next episode, wondering what trial and error our main characters will stumble upon. So we get to our next episode, which is called Homecoming, and this is the episode where Dylan's brother Mike invites Ashley to be his date for the upcoming homecoming dance. But when Dylan finds out, an argument ensues between him and the two, even going as far as Dylan pulverizing Mike. During the homecoming football game, Mike severely injures his arm as he would be rushed in the hospital for checkup. Despite Dylan's apology, he feels frustrated believing Ashley was thinking about getting with his brother Mike. Ashley clarifies on the mishap, assuring that she visited the hospital to check to see how Dylan was feeling. The episode ends when the two, along with Naomi, Jermaine, and Mr. Pena, leave the hospital in unison. Now, I honestly don't blame Dylan on this part. I mean, if I noticed my sibling is trying to hit on one of my best friends, I'd be irate just as him. Now, granted, it's not to say that he has no moments where he overreacted. For instance, going as far as laying damage on a vending machine. It just kind of feels like he and his brother Mike may have some sort of ongoing beef going on, a sort of a sibling rivalry. But as I continue to watch the show, however, it didn't really seem to be the case. Or it doesn't really seem to be as emphasized as much. But I'm glad things did work out between Dylan and Ashley. And there were pretty obvious moments where they were teasing a potential chemistry between the two. Especially in this episode, and even during the pilot episode being an example. I mean, who knows how things would have went if Ashley had a thing for Mike Jr. And then we get to the third episode. Now, I won't necessarily go through every episode throughout the 39 episodes since not the whole series is up online on YouTube, but I'm going to kind of review some of the more key important episodes or episodes that what I feel kind of sticks out the most for me. So that's kind of how I'm going to play this out as far as the how I structure the episode reviews are concerned. Since I'm not going to review every single episode, but I'm going to review episodes that are either important to the series or episodes that really kind of stick out for me, like there's something I really want to discuss about. So there are some episodes that are kind of missing online that you can't really find anywhere else, which is pretty unfortunate. But just to kind of clear that out for a little bit, and so the third episode, which is entitled State of Emergency, this is where Ashley gets peeved when she finds her mother contacting her on a frequent basis. At work, her mother took the time to contact her daughter, even when leaving a voicemail regarding her whereabouts. So there was this big rainstorm that's kind of going on, and Ashley and Jermaine have this science project that they have to make up before the deadline. At some point, Ashley's mother finds out about this, and Ashley even shut off her pager to avoid getting in touch with her mother. So she finds out and she gets irate at her daughter. And so this kind of, for a moment, just has those two just not having to speak with each other. So thankfully, a pep talk brings them much closer before Ashley invites her mother to meet up with her school counselor for a scheduled meeting with Mr. Pena. Ashley and her mother work out their differences, even going out of her way to invite Ashley's friends for dinner. Now, interesting trivia I learned is that when NBC listed the air dates on their homepage, viewers believed that there had been a lost episode that the network skipped during season 1. It wasn't until many years later when the N picked up reruns following its cancellation, the episode guideline lists State of Emergency and The Unusual Suspect as the same episode. So I'm not sure what people were thinking at that time, but it seemed like it was kind of a little misleading on NBC's part around the time that they were airing new episodes of the show when it was starting out. So I'm kind of wondering to see how people were reacting about that, but yeah, that was really weird. And but it was actually a really good episode. Really get to learn a little more about Ashley and especially her mother and how they're kind of dealing with the aftermath of her father's untimely death. It was definitely a really touching episode, and even though Ashley made some pretty questionable decisions, like completely ignoring her, and when it comes to this, I mean, there's really no right or wrong as to who's right, who's wrong, and both of them made mistakes and kind of went as far as just having sort of a dysfunction between family members. Overall, this episode serves its purpose in a way which continues showing the struggles that Ashley and her mother are experiencing. And I really think that it really did justice with these two characters. And then we get to Totally Random. And this is the gun shooting episode where at Naomi's party, Dylan spots the suspect responsible for a gun shooting incident that happened. And things get even more uglier the more Dylan resorts on keeping secrets about his knowledge and fear in front of his parents, Jermaine, and Ashley. In the end, Dylan insists that the suspect turns himself in during the interrogation, which he does, and Mr. Pena assures Dylan that the next time this situation happens again, then Dylan has to report it as soon as possible. And that's basically what the episode is in a nutshell. And I'll be honest, this episode felt pretty intense, having rewatched it a few times. I mean, if I were Dylan, I would have told my parents right then and there that something horrific happened. I mean, all this shooting and "you're a liar, why didn't you tell us sooner" remarks really felt unbearable to watch. At the same time, however, it really shows that the parents are doing their jobs and helping their children make good decisions. But I wonder how Ashley's mother would be reacting if she found out that Ashley was secretly out partying. Her sneaking out phase won't last, which brings us to our 6th episode, which is called One for the Road. So Ashley and Dylan get drunk after taking a sip of wine left on the kitchen counter by her mother. Mike, along with Naomi and Hunter, notice both of them being hammered, even to the point in which Ashley ends up vomiting on Mike's car. While Dylan is continuing to adjust to the hangover, an argument ensues between father and son as Dylan rethinks about his actions. It's revealed that his father is a recovering alcoholic, having attended therapy Dylan and Ashley continue to communicate through the phone, talking about their relationships with their fathers and the struggles they experienced in their past. Dylan reconciles with his father, and as punishment, he agrees to help him out via community service since Dylan's father is actually a carpenter. So, despite back to back after school specials, I thought this was handled very well. Not only do Ashley and Dylan learn of their mistakes, but we even get to learn a little more about some of the supporting characters. In this case, Dylan's father, Mike Sr. Granted, I've never drank a single sip of beer and wine, so I can't really go into more detail about alcohol. But I think Ashley's mother deserves some blame for this. I mean, why would she even consider leaving something such as an illegal substance for her daughter to get a hold of? I mean, shouldn't she have admitted to make a mistake by doing that? I mean, it's not to say Ashley and Dylan are at fault. I mean, they shouldn't have consumed so much alcohol to the point they no longer had control over their emotions. Jermaine made the right decision not to hang out with Dylan afterward, so I honestly don't blame him on that. And then we get to the seventh episode, which is called The Tutor. So Dylan's emotions on an upcoming history exam worries him until Ashley volunteers to help him study. Despite Dylan's enhanced confidence, he flunks the test horribly. As the episode progresses, we found out that Dylan has a learning disability, although it was never clearly stated what symptom or what particular disability he may have. Mr. Pena provides Dylan with assistance by bringing in a tutor to help him through the process. I could relate to Dylan to some extent. I remember having a hard time taking exams, even especially if they're timed. I always felt pressured, even having to rush to get to the very end of the test. Unlike Dylan, however, I had to be placed in a special ed class throughout my time attending grade school. I don't recall the show ever had a remediation program to begin with. The show seems to have a consistent track record when it comes to continuity for the most part. But towards the end of the episode, Dylan is shown helping out his father, established as a carpenter who helps constructing a particular area in a house. If you recall from One for the Road, Dylan gets caught for underage drinking as his father assigns him something to keep him occupied. Other shows from the TMC lineup have a habit of bringing up important plot points only to drop them in the end. Example in City Guys, Cassidy thanks Jamal for doing some sort of good deed, ending with a subsequent kiss at the end of the episode. Unfortunately, that kiss was never mentioned or followed up on by the episode afterwards. One thing that irked me a bit exactly is why is Ashley able to hang out with Jermaine and Dylan? I mean, her mother had grounded her for a while, so how is it she was able to crash at Dylan's house or even hang out by the skating rink? I'm not sure how much time has passed since the previous episode. Nevertheless, the tutor continues to expand on Dylan's academic struggles and how to cope with students who experience similar learning problems at school. So, definitely a pretty relatable episode, even though there are some questions that I have concerning how they structured the school system in the show compared to how they structure high school in real life. So that's kind of something that kind of really scratches my head. And then we get to the eighth episode, which is called Have Your Cake. Now, this episode, surprisingly enough, did get a nomination, according to Internet Movie Database. In this episode, Ashley hangs out with Dylan at a skating rink when they meet up with a girl named Molly. Over time, Ashley's jealousy becomes more apparent to the point she accuses him that he has feelings for Molly. Another subplot involves a situation where Ashley finds out that Naomi may have an eating disorder and encourages her to get help. Out of all the supporting characters, I have to say that Naomi has gotten the most characterization thus far. I mean, unless you want to count some of the family members of the main characters, Naomi seems to have a lot of connections to some of the main characters, particularly Dylan and Jermaine, who she has known the two since prior to the series, before Ashley moved into town. In Jermaine's case, he and Naomi got together as a couple until an unfortunate series of events caused them to break up. On the other hand, Dylan had mentioned in the pilot episode that she had known Naomi since they were in the third grade. So I think it really shows that while Ashley had good intentions, you could only go so far to eavesdrop on other people's personal lives. From here onwards, this lays the groundwork for Naomi and Ashley in their development as best friends. So I definitely really enjoyed this episode. Pretty sappy, but it was a pretty relatable episode, especially having to deal with characters as far as having secret issues are concerned, and that they're not always. We get to see a little more of a softer side to a supporting character like Naomi, and that she's not always this sort of self-centric egotist that only cares about herself. And we get to see a little more of a softer side. She has a issue that she's dealing with, and that her parents are hardly at home, and there's no one taking care of her. And it was brought up like even episodes before, and even in that sixth episode in One for the Road, where she and Hunter were out and she was asking what it'd be like to have foster parents and how she would love to have foster parents, and Hunter just backing her up, saying that it's not as glamorous as Naomi makes it out to be. It really, really shows that they were kind of like we were starting to know a little more about her, and it turns out that Naomi does have some issues outside of school, and I'm actually very surprised they didn't make her the main character throughout the series. And I think they like phased her character out later on in the season, or at least they like downplayed her significance on the show. Because according to some of the synopsis I read in season three, that she kind of disappeared and that she went to Cancun. So I'm assuming she spent time over there to reunite with their parents. I really felt that this was actually a really great episode. Really enhances Ashley's character, really enhances Naomi's as well. So I think it really goes hand in hand. And then we get to the tail end of season one, and basically around this time, I remember there was actually one episode where Dylan and Jermaine make a bet on Ashley to go to the mall to get autographs for a local rock band. And then Naomi ends up tagging along, and over time starts to further develop their bonding with one another. And then there was a falling out going on between Ashley and Naomi, that Naomi was willing to hook up with this cute boy. Ashley just kind of makes it sick to her stomach. So then she leaves Naomi behind. She rides her bike back to school. And then there was an accident that happened. There was like a little collision going on, and it turns out that the rock band, which is called Flip Nixon, ends up crashing Ashley's bike, and then they take her to the hospital. So Dylan, Jermaine, and Naomi, especially Naomi, she ends up going back to school, and they both kind of blaming themselves because of what happened with Ashley, and that she hasn't been back in school for the past hour or so. And then even Mr. Pena had to call in Ashley's mother to figure out where she is. And it turns out that they do. Dylan's mother is actually working as a doctor at ER, working as a doctor at a hospital specifically. So Dylan, Jermaine, Naomi, they end up visiting Ashley's place, and there's this sort of jam session that goes on towards the end of the episode. Naomi apologizes for Ashley, that she alienated her in favor of a guy that Naomi had a crush on. We get to Washed Up, which is the episode where it becomes more apparent as far as the teasing chemistry between Dylan and Ashley, that they've been kind of will they or won't they hook up sort of vibe that's been going on throughout the season, and even in that small part in the eighth episode. Now, things do go haywire where Ashley's ego, she starts this sort of fundraiser, and Dylan initially gets invited, but then decides to compete in a skating contest. So this kind of leaves Jermaine, Mr. Pena, Hunter, Naomi, and the rest of the supporting characters to participate in Ashley's fundraising event. And things don't really go the way as planned, and her ego just really drives away her volunteers. And you might remember Dylan's trainer, Molly, from Have Your Cake, so she's also involved in the skating contest. So, despite Dylan's victory, he opts out of the ceremonial speech and checks to see how Ashley's doing. Dylan makes it to the charity event, but finds out Ashley has gotten everything under control, which leads us into the 13th and the season 1 finale. Now, unfortunately, I can't really go into too much detail compared to the episodes that I reviewed up until this point, since this episode is unavailable anywhere else. And I would think there would at least be someone out there that has the tapes that they recorded for these episodes, because I know the end showed reruns for a bit, so you would think there would at least have someone out there that showed that recorded these episodes, even if it was during a rerun. But I don't know why this episode is very hard to find. But basically, we all know what happens is that Dylan and Ashley start to bond with each other, and Dylan is asking Mike and Jermaine just whether or not he should confess, that he should tell Ashley just how he's feeling about her. But we do know that the finale concludes with Ashley and Dylan confessing their feelings to one another. So they officially become a couple by the end of the first season. I definitely enjoyed what I've been seeing so far, and perhaps one of the few narrative-driven shows to come out of the TNBC lineup. Although it deals with the fundamentals of teenage normality, Just Deal shows that a teen drama could be a simple, family-friendly show without being too risque. While the focus on the first season particularly, involving Dylan and Ashley, with the notion of will they or won't they hook up, Jermaine did, however, have one episode devoting to him about the divorce of his interracial parents, including his contemplation of getting a tattoo. Fortunately, he would end up getting more development in the second half of the series, as well as a potential love interest with one of his co-workers. Now we segue into the second season of the TV show, and this season opens up with an episode entitled Second Date. Now, Dylan and Ashley go on a formal date one night, which ends up being a disaster. When they resort to their companions, Jermaine and Naomi, they begin to question their relationship status and whether or not that they're suited right for one another. This episode is filled with plenty of laughs and goof-ups, but at the same time you couldn't help but feel sorry for them. Dylan and Ashley haven't really had as much experience when it comes to dating, especially given how clumsy they were when they were trying to impress each other. Now, I wonder if Jermaine and Naomi's perspectives on dating kind of made me think as far as their advice towards Dylan and Ashley are concerned. Because you gotta think that Jermaine and Naomi, especially in that episode Homecoming, when it was revealed that they were in a relationship at one point before the show even began. So it really kind of got me thinking as to maybe these factors might have been the contributing reasons why Jermaine and Naomi might have broken up at some point. And that's kind of a question that got me thinking, especially during those awkward moments between Dylan and Ashley and how hard they tried to come off classy. I believe there was one instance where Dylan tried to award Ashley with a chair to sit on, and then that just kind of came off very awkward in a way. And then Ashley was playing around with her jewelry, and then she had her hair attached to one of the meals that they ordered. I think there was also one where Dylan tried to award Ashley with some water, and then he ends up spilling it on top of Ashley's shirt. So those are kind of one of the examples I could remember watching it from memory. And just the examples as to how hard that they tried to come off as classy and trying so hard to impress each other. But all in all, they do manage to patch things up, that they even admit that they weren't really acting like themselves during their formal date. But yeah, it's definitely turns out that Dylan and Ashley have maintained their relationship. Definitely a really funny episode. I definitely really enjoyed it. Now we get to High Fidelity. And this is the episode where Jermaine successfully applies for a job at a music store, which is called the Vinyl Frontier. He ends up falling for a girl named Kim, who ends up revealing herself as his coworker. Jermaine's cockiness gets the better of him when he finds out that she's already in a relationship. Now, if I were Jermaine and I spotted an attractive looking girl, I honestly would not get my hopes up. Because 9 times out of 10, they're likely going to be in a relationship with someone. So I thought he came off pretty overconfident throughout most of this episode. And during the side story, we have a confrontation between Ashley's mother and Dylan's parents. So this is the first time we've seen them face to face since the pilot episode. Now, their conversations were pretty awkward, and you could tell from Ashley's mother's face as how uncomfortable she looked. And due to not Ashley's mother, but Dylan's mother's narrow-minded remarks on divorce, it just kind of rubbed Ashley's mother the wrong way. But Dylan's mother owes Ashley's mother an apology and even visits her, I think it was like an apartment or a townhome, and she awards her with a delicious dessert to as sort of an apology to make up for her bland remarks. Now, this episode was supposed to air right after Second Date, according, especially looking at the old VHS rips. I believe Timbo might have recorded because he was the YouTube user that uploaded the whole, well, not the whole series, but uploaded a majority of the episodes of Just Deal. And a lot of the episodes that he uploaded were from the show's original broadcasts, especially that episode Second Date being an example. So, due to the September 11th attacks, because High Fidelity was supposed to air after Second Date, so because of the events that happened with 9/11, with the bombing of the Twin Towers and the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., so High Fidelity ended up airing 2 weeks later, and the following week after 9/11, they ended up airing an episode called Picture Day. So I actually thought that was actually pretty interesting because I watched the series. I remember watching Just Deal for the first time, and I was wondering, despite the advertisement that High Fidelity and Jermaine's Focus episode was going to air after Second Date, so I got confused as far as NBC's air dates were concerned because the episode after that was entirely nothing like what I saw from the promo during the split screen credits. So that's something that I was very confused on, but it was an interesting trivia there. There was an episode called Painted Love, which is the episode where Dylan helps Ashley load a sculpture for an upcoming art contest, but they soon come across Ashley's ex-boyfriend named Josh. Not only does this irritate Dylan, but at the expense of satisfying Ashley's needs, has completely drifted Dylan from their relationship. Now, I think Dylan has every right to be upset. Ashley hadn't seen Josh since moving from San Francisco to Beechwood, and when they reunited, it sparked a lot of joy in her. Now, the problem behind this is that Ashley's self-ego really got the better of her, even getting to the point where Dylan was just a mere afterthought. So it even got to the point where she almost considered going off to attend a wedding ceremony with her ex-boyfriend. Unfortunately, this won't be the last mistake she'll make as far as her and Dylan's relationship is concerned. But in the case of this episode, she took the time to ponder carefully to prioritize what's important over her needs. I do think that while Ashley is a very genuinely likable person, there are some occasions where she would make some very questionable decisions, and it really felt like she wasn't fully 100% invested in the relationship compared to Dylan, who's doing all he can to make it work. And there are times where Ashley just kind of really feels spaced out, or that she even nearly got back together with Josh, and it just kind of really rubs Dylan the wrong way, and I honestly don't blame him. But overall, Ashley ends up making taking some time to reconsider, and she ends up not going to the wedding ceremony that Josh has invited her to come to. Painted Love was an episode to really advance Ashley, and we also get a little cameo from her art teacher. And I mention this because he'll play a big part in the following episode, which is called The Perfect Mix. And Ashley finds out that her art teacher, Mr. Vaughn, is dating her mother when Ashley was hanging out with her friends at a bowling alley. Much to Ashley's chagrin, she refuses to talk to her mother, which brings her an inspiration during an art assignment where she draws inspiration to come up with two bowling pins representing the both of them, and she uses that bowling ball to knock down the bowling pins that represents just how infuriated or frustrated as far as her reaction goes when she found out that her art teacher and her mother were going out one night. Well, it was actually a pretty intense episode. I mean, not so much that Ashley spots Mr. Vaughn and her mother, but just to witness all this in front of her friends just really traumatized her, if that's the word to appropriately describe it as. But I would feel the same way if I witnessed one of my parents date with someone that's a coworker, or in this case of this episode, a school teacher. But I'm glad things do work out in the end, even if Ashley and her mother's, as far as their pep talks concerned, just came off pretty sappy. But I mean, even despite all the friction that Ashley and her mother have had since the awakening of her father's untimely tragedy, it just kind of really shows that Ashley and her mother are willing to cope with their affiliation with one another, shows some sort of a mother-daughter bond, a sort of connection that they're still doing all they can to keep them in touch and prevent themselves from even not talking to each other for a long time. I'm pretty relieved that things do work out in the end, even if their pep talk did come off a little sappy and something out of a 90s family friendly drama or sitcom, like something you would see on Full House. But at the same time, it was pretty uplifting. I'm definitely glad that Ashley and her mother managed to work some things out. Now we transition over into the episode Home Sweet Home. Now, I didn't mention this in Painted Love, but it was also planted the seeds in that episode where Jermaine learns that his mother has received a job offer in Washington, D.C., with the possibility of having Jermaine to move away from his friends from the state of Washington over to the East Coast. So the District of Columbia is where exactly her mother is getting the job offer. So they did work some things out, and this kind of segues into Home Sweet Home. And Jermaine moves in with his father, who now resides along with his stepmother and stepson. So Jermaine is struggling to adjust to his new surroundings, and I'll be honest, I do think that Jermaine just came off pretty rude throughout most of the episode. And even despite the fact that Angela, which is the mother that Jermaine's father ended up living with. So I do think that he came off pretty rude in that episode, even when his folks, especially Angela, were doing all they can to help him adjust living under a new roof. In this sense, Jermaine just, for most of his childhood, lived as a single child, living with his mother, had custody over him. So he wasn't really used to having to follow family household rules. I mean, all in all, when it's all said and done, he managed to come to his senses and realize that there's more to family, whether or not you're blood related. And then we get to the season 2 finale, which is called Passages. Now, Dylan invites Ashley for a summer family camping trip. Ashley initially accepts until she receives an acceptance note from the mail regarding an art institute that she applied to. When Ashley informs Dylan about the news, it breaks his heart immensely. Meanwhile, as the school year winds down, Mike Jr.'s parents throw out a graduation party for him. However, Mike's concerned that there won't be a lot of people attending, with the notion that there won't be any partying or boozing with alcohol. He believes that once he leaves for college, his fear of leaving the life he left behind won't be the same, and how quote unquote scary it's like to be in the real world during a conversation he had with his brother Dylan. Now, interesting to note that despite this being the second season, filming for the first season lasted around the summer of 2000 all the way into the spring of 2001. NBC had a habit of taking a yearly hiatus of their Saturday morning lineup, with new episodes to come the next fall schedule. In other words, season 2 is actually in conjunction with the first season, with the intention of airing 26 total episodes. The characters were in school, no mention about being the new school year, same clothing and makeup. Only difference was that the counselor from the first season, Mr. Pena, was quietly written out of the series. I don't think they ever really explain as to why Mr. Pena left the school in the first place, unless there was some mention during the season 1 finale, but unfortunately I can't really find the full episode of the 13th episode of the series, so which is quite unfortunate since I was willing to watch that episode to kind of add some additional notes to the episode. But Mr. Pena was one of the earlier characters to be phased out of the show prematurely. But I don't really understand why NBC or the producers arranged their schedule that way. This would be around the time when NBC started to partner up with Discovery, as they announced that they would be overhauling their Saturday morning lineup in favor of Discovery Kids. Now, by this point, all the shows presented on the TNBC lineup was ceased to production, although in reality, Just Deal was the only program by that point to air new episodes. To make matters worse, NBC went ahead and burned out the remaining episodes of the show without fanfare. With NBC's decision to retire the TNBC block, Just Deal was canceled as a result. Now, in hindsight, it kind of really got me thinking as to the reason why the show ended up getting canceled the way it did. It makes me want to think as to whether or not this show was even worthy of being on a channel like NBC to begin with. Like, for instance, back then you had local TV networks, especially with the WB, which their target audience was geared towards teens and young adults. So you would think it would have been logical if they would have aired a show on the WB, maybe add a little more production value, and maybe add an extra hour to make it a traditional 1 hour primetime drama in the veins of like Gilmore Girls or Buffy, Dawson's Creek as such. Or maybe put it on a channel like Nickelodeon or Disney Channel as far as basic cable outlets are concerned. Because this is one of the few family-friendly half-hour shows that never aired on any of the established networks that I mentioned. And NBC wasn't really known for producing shows geared towards a younger audience, unless you were a show like Saved by the Bell, for instance. But, you know, as far as NBC's primetime lineup was concerned, you had shows like Friends, Frasier, Will and Grace, Mad About You, Seinfeld, and even some of the dramas that they were airing like Law and Order, ER, The West Wing, Third Watch, and a couple other shows that I haven't really made mention. And yeah, even NBC had a couple teen dramas as well, like Malibu Shores and Freaks and Geeks, which ironically got canceled a couple months before this show premiered. Now, they did have a success with Friday Night Lights, even though that wasn't necessarily a big, massive hit as far as TV ratings are concerned, but it did have managed to develop a cult following where NBC was convinced enough to continue running the show for a couple more seasons before moving it to ESPN. Now, with this, in this case with Just Steel, it's definitely one of the more forgotten gems as far as out of all the teen dramas that have gotten canceled a lot sooner than it did. But I never really hear anyone talk about this show. It really kind of makes me wonder if it was put on a better network or on a better time slot. Maybe it would have really done well. Maybe it would have gotten the recognition that it deserves. I mean, yeah, you have TNBC, so it kind of really fits the motif of the Saturday morning block, but you gotta think that this show was kind of overshadowed with a lot of the other programs that were featured on TNBC, like City Guys, Hang Time, those sort of shows. When people think of TNBC throughout the years and all those teen sitcoms that were produced by Peter Engel during that time. So you would think that Just Deal kind of looked pretty out of place as far as the landscape, the content that they were providing on the TNBC lineup. You kind of really got to think that maybe this show was more suited for prime time. And, who knows if the show would have still continued longer than it ended up being. But as far as the third season's concerned, I wanted to go into detail on that, but unfortunately there aren't any episodes up. And it's only been 7 years since Timbo uploaded most of the episodes of the show. And I appreciate the effort without having my discovery of the show and having to watch the episodes that he's uploaded. So if it wasn't for that, I honestly wouldn't even be doing this review at the moment. But I did look over at some of the synopsis for the episodes on TV.com. And I'm going to try and be as accurate as I possibly can, although I won't be 100% guaranteed accurate. But this is basically what I wrote down as far as a summary of the third season's concerned. Now, during summer camp, Dylan meets up with a girl named Laurel, who is portrayed by Jewel Staite. And she actually was on this show towards the end of the series. And Dylan starts to spark some potential romantic interest in her. It even started to call her Lucky throughout the first few episodes, and Ashley and Jermaine aren't really sure who this Lucky girl is. But it turns out that Dylan does meet a girl named Lucky, who in actuality is named Laurel. And, Dylan and Ashley do still maintain their relationship. However, as the season wore on, it starts to become more apparent that the two of them aren't clicking as much as they did prior to the summer break. Dylan even goes as far as sparking feelings for Jewel Staite's character, even contemplating whether or not to take her out to the high school dance. And it turns out at some point during the dance that Dylan and Ashley had some sort of falling out, and they ended up breaking up at some point. Towards the end of the series, it turns out that Ashley ended up cheating on Dylan and ends up having an affair with Josh, who you might remember him from Painted Love, when he gets accepted at the same art institute that Ashley attended from Passages. Dylan feels heartbroken after witnessing the revelation. The series ends on a downer when Ashley and Dylan agree that their relationship isn't working out before deciding to become friends again. It even reminds me of the Wonder Years series finale, where Kevin and Winnie were in a relationship towards the end of the series, and then Kevin catches Winnie seeing this other guy, and Kevin just was heartbroken, and then they ended up breaking up and later became friends at the time the series had ended. So it definitely reminded me of how Dylan and Ashley's relationship had ended, as far as having read that synopsis. So, as far as the supporting characters are concerned, there have been characters that have been just came and went throughout the series, like I mentioned with Mr. Pena, the guidance counselor. There was also a character named Hunter, who is portrayed by David Patkow. I hope I pronounced his last name right, but he has had a pretty somewhat successful career. I believe he was on the show with on Flashpoint, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that his character had a love interest with Amy Jo Johnson, who you may remember her as Kimberly, the original Pink Power Ranger. So, um, I believe his character and Amy Jo Johnson's character on the show had some sort of love interest on the show. Yeah, he was hardly on this show. I mean, he had a few scenes here and there, but he didn't really get the same amount of screen time as the three main characters or Naomi or the family members of the show. So I can't really remember anything memorable that he did throughout that show, even though his character was kind of like a troublemaker that got caught in trouble in the law, and then he got sentenced to jail, according to Naomi at the beginning of the series. His character, I think, he didn't really play as much of a big role as I thought he was going to have. I think if the show had been a 1 hour drama, I think they probably could have fleshed out his character a little more. But maybe that's just me. Naomi, who ends up becoming a, Ashley's best friend throughout most of the series, but her character gets either downplayed significantly in the third season or she was phased out of the series completely. Which is actually a pretty damn shame considering out of all the girlfriends that Ashley's made since moving to Beechwood, that Naomi is the only real girlfriend that she ended up making a big bond with. I guess she ended up bonding with Laurel and Mandy, who ends up being Jermaine's new co-worker in the third season. And, with Joel State's character Laurel, like I mentioned as well. But overall, Just Steel, definitely really enjoyed this show. I really would like to see this show in reruns, maybe on Teen Nick once again. But I don't think the new generation of kids would even remember this show, to be honest. And it's just a shame that it's been a sort of a lost gem in the public eye. That's pretty much it for this video, I suppose. So let me know what you thought down in the comment section below. Stay tuned for whatever the next installment of my GSTV Obscurities video is going to be. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you have any nostalgic memories watching this show, tell me what your thoughts about it. Until then, this is the GSTV reviewer signing out.